Say hi, Curt.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming on a Sunday morning. It is still Saturday evening here, so enjoying a really, really nice day, and a part of that nice day is spending time with you. In just a few moments, our library will make its final closing announcement for the day, and I'll probably mute my microphone at that time. I chose to do these sessions from the library because of our very strong T6 line, and I like strong communications when we're sharing time and space around the world. Passenger and immigration research. I know that most of us, when we think about immigration, we think almost immediately the passenger list, and we just long to find the list that each one of our ancestors came to our native, or from our native lands to our current lands, whether it's in New Zealand or whether it's Canada or whether it's the United States. We long to find that list showing our ancestor with the other passengers coming to New Zealand or coming to Newfoundland in the case of our wonderful, gracious host. So doesn't always happen, does it? In fact, I have a devil of a time finding my ancestors, my immigrant ancestors on passenger lists. But I don't really ever worry about that because I like to think of immigration passenger list research, if you will, as a process. I'm going to mute myself for just a moment.
The library is now closed. No further library materials will be checked out at this time. May I please have your attention? The library is
Well, I guess I wasn't successful in muting myself, but that's okay.
Materials will be checked out at this time. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
No more interruptions during our session. I'm so happy. So when we think about passenger immigration research, I like to think about it as a process. And I like to think about it in a way that I fear some of us don't think about it. I like to think about it, and I hope this doesn't sound immodest, I like to think about it in the proper order, because if we're researching from the present to the past, we're going to encounter our immigrant ancestor here, wherever here is, in New Zealand or Newfoundland or Indiana in the United States. We're going to encounter them here, and then we're possibly going to find them on a passenger list, and then we're going to find them in their country of origin, where they left from, where they embarked from. So we're going to approach it that way. Many of us know that their passenger list is just one. It's important, but it's one record. I would argue that it's not necessarily the most important record, depending on the time period, what shipping company kept records, what was required. It may not be a very robust record at all. So I really believe that we can make the best stab at finding the passenger list and make the best stab at getting the entire family story about that immigrant ancestor by engaging the process, looking for data and records and documents in all three segments: settling down, arriving, and leaving. That's how we're going to encounter our ancestors. A lot of people think about, well, they left and they came and they settled somewhere. I'm going to look for them leaving. No, it's much easier. It's much sounder research. Look for them settling down wherever you find them and then proceed back. So sound research methodology, it's the key. All those bullet points I just talked about. I like to tease some of the students that I teach in a continuing ed class at the local university here. I ask them when we start talking about immigration and passenger lists, etc., I make it sound very official. I say, so what National Archives group are the settling down records? National Archives usually have some kind of official number, N42 or record set 2-475. And they look like, oh my gosh, was that in the reading? Was that in the homework assignment? There is no such thing as a class of records officially as settling down records. They're all the records that document an immigrant family and immigrant ancestor's life. So I call them settling down records. So I hope that doesn't confuse you. They're not a record class, but they are a class of records, if that makes sense. Settling down documents look through all the records of a locality where your ancestor lived or where you suspect she or he lived. Look for all of them. last hour, some of you were with me for WorldCat. That's a tool to help find all those records. And remember those search keys. I brought these up a couple of times during your wonderful expo. Religion, ethnicity, occupation, geographic location. Excuse me. All those research keys are very, very important. Got a little dry spell there. So let's look at settling down records, records in the places where our families settled down. So this is a county gazetteer, a historical gazetteer for a county in New York, where you see my cursor rolling at the bottom of the screen. Throughout this entire gazetteer, for more than a century, they list families, heads of families, and where they came from. That's why these are such beautiful records and so important records, settling down records. So Honorable William Smith, born in County Derry, Ireland, when he came here, his ancestry, both sides, father's side, mother's side, were defenders of Londonderry, etc., etc., etc. A county history in my home county, where 4 generations of my ancestors came from in this state. They talk about in the county history where people came from. They talk about the founder of the county, so to speak, who was an immigration agent. If you can identify immigration agents in the places, the countries, and the towns where your ancestors settled, you begin to get a good idea of where they were recruiting immigrants from. This father, Joseph Kundek, was really a character. I'm not going to get in there too much, or we'll spend 2 hours just on him, and that's not the purpose of this talk. But for a priest, he told some wild tales, trying to get German-speaking Catholics to southern Indiana. He said things like, God has specially blessed this land. You just kind of look at the land and crops just grow up. While telling Germans from the German city-state areas of Europe that life is really good here during the 19th century, yeah, they'll come. More town and county histories. This is from the Western United States. Dancing with Mules. Kind of an interesting title for a county history, but throughout that, all the biographical sections tell where the family members came from. Many states in the United States, provinces in Canada, have material that tells you where people came from as they settled a particular area. These are gold. If you know where your ancestors settled, look for these ethnic compilations that talk about where individuals came from. They are literally gold. So people in Indiana, every single ethnic group that ever touched toe in Indiana has a section in this encyclopedic tome on peopling Indiana. And this is the section on French who settled in Indiana. And there's only like 4 counties in the entire 19th century where French lived in Indiana. It all had to do with water and church. And that's important to know. Now we know where to look for individuals. So French immigrants, there's a little section just basically verifying what I was saying. There's maps in these compilations to identify, in this case, the German area where people came from and settled in Indiana. A huge consequential section on Germany. The German born in Oldenburg and Franklin County, Indiana, settled primarily from Oldenburg in Germany. You might say, duh, who wouldn't understand that? Well, sometimes we miss those geographic designations in the new country, the country where our ancestors settled, have a direct tie or part of the town, the area, the region, the province, the burg in the old country. Very consequential. We could read for hours this tome on peopling Indiana. Look for other special publications that are ethnically based. So if Germany, German city-states, Prussia, if that area is where you suspect your ancestor may have come from, look for any publications that address that particular ethnic group in the settling down location, the first location where you suspect or you believe your ancestors settled down. They give us all kinds of clues and tips. So what a number of societies did is they took resources in Allen County, Indiana, this county that I'm speaking to you from, and they abstracted immigration coming into the country documents. And it tells a lot of information as you just quickly scroll through with my cursor: father, mother, born where, sister, resided, etc. We would look at the key to decode all those abbreviations. Here's the same kind of a book, only just for Germans in Minnesota. Another book on the right, German and the Immigration, 1816 to 85, so nearly the entire 19th century. So look for these kind of books wherever you find your family. And while they may be more heavily or more numerously published in North America, you will find these kinds of publications in other places around the world as well. Even if your ancestors came into a large city like not Fort Wayne, but like New York, Fort Wayne, small city, New York, huge city. There are lots of compilations in New York that take boroughs or places, wards in a city, and tell you who's settling in these. You can barely see the key at the bottom, but it's telling you the density of German settlements in this particular area of New York City. I have to pause here and share this story with you because it fits right in with what we're talking about, settling down documents. I'm going to poke a little fun at Americans because I think I'm entitled to do that. I think as an American, I have license to do that. So unlike many countries throughout the world, in America, there's a much, much smaller number, much smaller percentage of the population that speaks any other language except English, whereas many other countries, people are bilingual and trilingual. So what I tell people in the United States when they're looking for these settling down documents, that sometimes French documents are in French, and sometimes German documents are in German. And I don't know if anyone is smiling in the room where you're at, but people usually laugh because at the reference desk here in the Genealogy Center, this book would be like, oh my gosh, how am I going to find anything in this book? It's like, well, we need to find a way to translate that. But let's get back to the theme, looking for information where your ancestors settled. So because I am a citation analysis nut, I look for bibliographies and endnotes and footnotes in every kind of publication I can find where my ancestors settled down. I came upon this late 20th century publication. It was a collaboration between a German professor and an Indiana University professor, and they were studying where did Germans leave from in Germany and the German city-state area, and where did they settle in the United States. And they wrote this like 98-page book about one of my home counties, Ferdinand Township of Du Bois County. This is Widner Township over on the western side of the state. And you might say, big deal, Curt. Why are you so excited about this? These two professors looked at so many documents, and they're telling you, if you have Germans that settled in Widner Township, these are the places they came from. Ferdinand, quite a few more places. Now I know why I'm so challenged in trying to find the place where my German ancestors specifically came from, because these are all the general places in Germany where Germans who settled in Ferdinand Township in the mid-19th century through the 20th century, that's where they came from. Even though with Ferdinand Township, I have a lot of places to search and to check, I have a list now. And I can't tell you how excited that is for me, because my Germans were poor, mostly farmers, mostly loggers. Farmers are loggers. Not a whole lot of records, so looking at settling down records takes a big, long, deep look to find good information. And I stumbled upon this publication. I can't tell you, I'm still reaping the benefits of knowing these specific areas, including flat maps in the book of where various families settled in each of those townships. So settling down records are just so amazing. So many societies, and there are a lot of ethnic societies in every country. There are many in North America. Look for their work. And their work, typically in North America, tends to be abstracting and transcribing or creating an index for newspapers and other publications that many copies did not survive. So an organization started abstracting and transcribing Germans in German newspapers in the Philadelphia area for the 18th century, 1743 to 1800. And there's amazing information in this. Where we can find an archive that has the paper, we always want to check the transcription that we see on the screen here, but there's decent amounts of information for the mid to late 18th century here. And you can see just quickly by glancing through this information about Germans who settled in Philadelphia. Here's another Philadelphia correspondent, another newspaper. There are advertisements in the newspaper about people who have lost members of their family, or in this case, this gentleman lost his servant. He's trying to identify his servant. So, hey, if you see this guy, run into this guy, let me know. Family papers and documents are also part of settling down records. And you can find all sorts of typescripts and handwritten documents that may be in local archives or maybe in unofficial family archives that have been passed down through the generations in a family. Family Bibles, letters, diaries, oftentimes may contain really important pieces of information about where did this family come from? Why did they come here? Why did they settle? Why did they settle in this area? And so I've kind of circled just one individual and information about that person in some family papers. Family Bible, this is the Glennon family, and it's telling you where they hailed from in Ireland in 1841 and where they settled here in the United States. So a family paper can give you a specific place in the old country. I'm going to make a statement here. I'll make it a couple times probably throughout our time together. A lot of passenger lists don't exist, didn't survive, and we have to kind of get over that fact. Yeah, they're rich pieces of information if and when we can find them, but a lot didn't survive. We don't necessarily need the list to make that tie to the old country. We can use settling down documents to make that tie over to the old country. And this is one example. 6 handwritten lines in a family Bible? Well, that can give us some hints. Look for organizational or institutional records that may be ethnically based. So the Immigrant Savings Bank just sounds like a regular bank, but it was founded for Irish immigrants. So people who left Ireland, immigrant, leaving folks who left Ireland. I would have called it immigration. I am, but this is Immigrant Savings Bank. And the records are pretty robust for bank records. These are on Family Search, I believe. They're on microfilm in a number of different places. This is the mid-19th century, 1800s. And just scrolling left to right across the ledger, here's the name of the individual, the depositor, if you will. And then you have their occupation, and then scrolling left to right across the ledger, you have reference. And look what the reference is. The reference tells you where they came from in Ireland. Some of you may have looked at these records. I still am amazed that an organizational record, what looks like a banking record, has so much meaningful genealogical or family history information. But knowing that it's a bank that was put together to help immigrants save and to make it well in the new country, that makes sense. A lot of transcribed information. So Netherlands, New Netherlands, before the state of New York became New York, individuals have transcribed records out of family documents, local documents, archives, and other record repositories. I've come up with a nice publication with a lot of great information. All these are what I call my settling down records. Head of the household, their children, not necessarily in birth order as it says, all kinds of actionable item. And then Curt's happy because look at all those references, 6 different references there for us to continue our search. Many areas of North America, Canada, and the United States actually have little publications that helped immigrants be more successful. In those publications, we can glean information about where these immigrants were coming from. So this is just a couple sample shots. Also, sometimes we need to get out and walk around. And what do I mean by get out and walk around? So one of my hometowns in Jasper, Indiana, again, 4 to 5 generations, depending on which side of the family I'm talking about, lived in Jasper, Indiana. And they came from, the original families came from a couple of different areas in Germany. In the side yard of St. Joseph Catholic Church in Jasper, Indiana, there's this plaque memorializing the 11 families and where they came from in Germany in 1847. Oh my goodness, this is a memorial plaque in a church side yard. And from that, we have a place in Germany, we have a time, and we obviously have the geographic location. So I would call this plaque, I'd stretch it a little bit, but I'd call this plaque a settling down record. So I'm going to pause here, take a breath. That to me is the gold when we're talking about our ancestors' immigration experience. Please take the time to burrow in, to really take a deep dive into the records where your immigrants first settled. If they did a lot of moving, some families did, some families didn't. Try to capture that first place and really do a deep dive. Settling down documents, I just can't emphasize them enough. You have so many clues and so many direct links to the original country, to the country of origin in the settling down documents. So let's quickly move on to the arriving documents. This is what people get excited about. Passenger lists. Oh my goodness, where can I find the passenger list? In my 40 plus years here at the Allen County Public Library, having the honor of helping so many genealogists find their family story, I have made so many cry because we search and we look and we use settling down documents. We get to the old country, we don't get to the passenger list, and because they may not exist. So just a quick aside, here in the United States, there are no official passenger lists before 1800. But we know people were coming into North America, Canada, United States in the 1600s, 1500s, 1400s. How do we find those lists? I'll give you some clues as we go along. But you can apply this same strategy to anywhere in the world. Where did the family first settle down in South Africa, if we're talking about the Dutch coming to South Africa? Where did the family first settle down if we're talking about our gracious host family coming to Newfoundland? Where did they first settle down? But when we move to the second sort of records, the second type class of records, the arriving records. These are what I consider to be the arriving records, although I think the last 3 aren't so much arriving records as settling down records. Maybe we can agree to call them bridging records. They bridge the settling down documents and the arriving records. But everyone lusts after passenger and arrival lists. Also arriving documents are hospital records or detainee lists, people who weren't allowed to come in for whatever reason. Alien registrations, that isn't a little chuckle here, that isn't registrations of people from Mars or Jupiter or outer space, but people who are not citizens. Then oaths of allegiance, declarations of intent, those can give us great tips for where someone was in the old country. So let's take a look. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit because time just flies. So this is an 1820s passenger list, only 2 names on here, a merchant and a servant, and we scroll across left to right. They belong to Great Britain and they intend to stay citizens of Great Britain. So they're just here to do trade. Another passenger list for the 1876 time period, much more detailed entry, age, sex, occupation, and then country to which they severally belong and intend to become citizens. And you can see that a lot are coming over here to become citizens. Scrolling again left to right across the document. Their mode of transportation, if you will, how they traveled on the ship. Decent information. Have to throw in a little tip here. If you have the ability, and all of us today in the 21st century, capture this record, even if it's electronically, take the whole list, not just your family on the list, because you may at some time need to go back and look at who else came on the list from the same old world country, not the same surname. I hope that makes sense. Take the whole list, because you may find short-tail cousins, or more importantly, people of the same village, town, burg, traveling together. Here's an early 20th century passenger list. I know it's a horrible copy. It's hard to get good copies from the online documents, but all of us wish for this kind of detail: the name, sex, married, occupation, nationality. We're going left to right again. Last residence, so where they were living in the old country, their final destination, city or town, whether they have a ticket to the final destination. In other words, are you going to be indigent in the port city, or can you get where you need to go? That was big in the United States. I love these really genealogical questions like, are you in possession of $50 or more? Because again, we want you to be able to take care of yourself. And scrolling down, are you a polygamist? Are you an anarchist? What's the condition of your mental and physical health? Well, these were kind of important for a country, and many countries had these kinds of tests, who really didn't want to be burdened taking care of immigrants. And that little trail comes right through to today. So passenger lists can tell us a lot. Again, don't lose sleep if you can't find one. Another Philadelphia passenger list for 1840. Again, kind of robust: name, age, sex, occupation. And as we come across, we can see, they intend to stay here in the United States. Look for groupings of names. We can make a hypothesis when we see a group of individuals with the same surname that these people are together. Sometimes it's injurious to our research to go from hypothesis to fact, or to statement of fact, without really proving that fact. These could be several families. So we have a 34, 22, 31, 38, 7, 9, 21. Those are interesting ages, aren't they, for it to be one nuclear family? So I just point that out. Be good historical detectives and look at all the information. Finding names on passenger lists, there's a free website, stevemorse.org, stevemorse.org. He links to a lot of places where you can search. If where he's linking is a fee site, he'll have a $sign next to it. But just one way to continue to look for passenger lists. And you can come up with some transcriptions from his site. Transcribed lists, the Immigrant Ship Transcription Guild has a lot of free transcribed lists. Pick your volume based on time period, pick your ship, and there's the transcribed list of passengers. Again, if possible, try to find the source of the transcription and see if you can get to that original source to make sure the transcription is faithful. And always watch for spelling. Things are just majorly misspelled, as you know, I'm sure, from your research. Germans to America, a bunch of college students who were interestingly directed, put together Germans to America. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of volumes, or it's on Ancestry. So you can look at this database on Ancestry. This is the limited amount of information you get: the passenger, age, occupation. And then this province and village. GR is Germany, no province. And 4Zs means it was not available. Well, most of these 4Zs records were from well-intentioned individuals who really didn't look carefully at the record. In most instances, there is a village listed, or they didn't come from Germany. They were Germans who came through Liverpool, England, to get to North America. So be wise, smart historians, genealogists. All kinds of oaths of allegiance, people declaring their allegiance to the United States. I mentioned earlier that there's no official preserved in our federal archives passenger lists for anything earlier than 1800. So the 1794 published list is pretty important because there were lists of passengers published in newspapers, were tacked up on town squares. Here are the people that are arriving. They did that so that family members would know, aha, the ship came in, I can look for my family member, my cousin, or someone from the same village who's meeting me to come settle, or I'm meeting them, I should say, to come settle in the place here in the United States. So just a close-up of one of those transcribed lists. Here's a list of aliens held for inspection. LPC typically means lack of proper credentials. This list I always keep with me when I give these kind of presentations because it's kind of befuddling to me. Because in 1904, coming into the United States, there was no stringent credentialing required. So for all these people to be lack of proper credentials who came in on this particular ship on this particular date is kind of interesting. But these records of aliens held for inspection, are interesting. So a close-up here, here's a reason why two are held. In addition to this column, which was for lack of proper credentials, this person's held because they're suspected of being senile, and this person's being held because he's blind in his right eye. And if we continue across this page left to right, we see that the senile person or the suspected senile person was sent back. And the person who was blind in the right eye was permitted to come in because there's nothing over here about being deported. So it's interesting to trace individuals through records of aliens being held. So many books and historical and genealogical society newsletters and quarterlies have drawn together lists of people they have found in period newspapers. So these are newspapers in Boston, the Boston Pilot from 1857 to 60, only 3 years, where people took out advertisements for finding Irish who they were supposed to meet. They came in to the port of Boston, and family members were there, and immigrants were there, and they were looking for each other. So you would see advertisements. More newspapers inquiring about Gottlieb Daniel Hoffman. This is where he was born. His father being a clergyman. He went to Hamburg as a servant, immigrated to America several years ago, and he's been lost. They're trying to find where he's at. All kinds of things. Periodical literature, I've mentioned that a couple of times. Find My Past has the Periodical Source Index as one of its resources. You can actually search it on Find My Past for free. You just can't get to the search results, which sometimes is frustrating. But you can look for passenger lists this way by putting in Ohio, and then put in passenger list, and then see what kind of search results come up. And Ohio passenger list, there's 409, not 499, but 409 lists that come up, and then we can narrow by these facets over on the left. Notice once again, we can narrow by facets. One of the filters or facets is county, and so there are 19 Ohio passenger lists for the Cleveland, Cuyahoga County area, that northern part of Ohio. And there's the article. You could write to a library or go to a library that has the Palatine Emigrant. And this is more from that same article. Periodical Source Index, use all kinds of ways you can search for immigrants with an I or emigrants with an E, people leaving and people arriving. If you see the little page or camera over here, that means they have digitized the actual record. And here's a list of early immigrants to New Netherland. And then we can see the actual article itself. So many books have been published about how one becomes a citizen. If you're looking for naturalization or citizenship records, find the process. And there's so many documents one can use to find information. This is a homestead record here in the United States. So people applying for basically free land. There's usually some ties to that free land, things they had to do. But here in the red square is a settling down document that links back to the old country. The best book for naturalization processes and procedures here in the United States. Look for this kind of book in whatever country you're looking at. What are their requirements to become a citizen? Some areas of the world, if you're not born there, you can't become a citizen. So be knowledgeable about your search. American naturalization records, there are all kinds depending upon the time period. So knowing a bit of your history. Most of us genealogists love the free form ones because there's a free form declaration of intent, part of the naturalization process, about a gentleman, John Hyde, or Philip Hyde, I should say, Philip Hyde, born in the county of Lancaster, Kingdom of Great Britain. And I wish we had time to really look at this, but it tells you how he arrived, how he traveled through the United States, and came to settle in eastern Indiana. It chronicles his life, and it gives you that place where you can begin searching in the old country. There are a lot of formed naturalization papers where you don't have that free form, where you can just write and kind of do a narrative. Here you just fill in the blanks, but still worthwhile. Here's some transcriptions of naturalization records. And here's just more examples of person born, who their parents were, etc. Another declaration of intent, petition for naturalization. The formed documents, usually you'll have the place where they left from, country-wise, who they had declared their allegiance to and who they're now going to declare their allegiance to, the United States. I like this publication. There's 5,620,000 immigrants who came between the 16th and mid-20th century, so the 1500s to the mid-1900s in the New World, which for purposes here, New World meant Canada and the United States. So where are they getting all these lists? They're getting them from newspapers. They're getting them from old, early 1800s, late 1700s periodicals and magazines that were published. And this is many, many dozens of very thick compilations. Or it's all on Ancestry. Ancestry has this. If you look at the paper, you'll see the name of the person, and you'll see a very bold number, and then a lighter page number after it. The bold number refers you to the source document. That would be the bold number. And then you know the page in this book where that person is listed. Sometimes it's a very scarce amount of information that will be on this passenger list, the earlier passenger list. Sometimes it's a pretty robust article. Look for them. Very worth your while. So this is one of the articles that was indexed in that $5.6 million name compilation. And you see, many of these were Swiss and German, had been in the country as early as 1727, greater amounts came in between this time period. Most were Protestant or Reformed religion. So yeah, they settled in Lancaster. They were naturalized about always makes me nervous, between makes me nervous, and it's just a list of names. So this is an example of something, passenger list, I use the term loosely, that really doesn't have much data at all associated with it. You do have a place where they settled. You have a religion. They were Swiss and German. So again, that makes me nervous because we know, depending on where they were in the world, they may be neither, but interesting nonetheless. So another article, naturalization records that were abstracted. This gives you a little more information. Native of Ireland, boy, it would be nice if they told us where. Native of Ireland, native of Lower Palatine, Germany. Okay, native of Great Britain, not so helpful. But take the information that we can get, right? Moving toward more publications, what is circled was the article that was in that big index that's on Ancestry, the Philby Passenger and Immigration List Index. That's the article that was referenced. Every single thing on the screen there that has an arrow by it, that's also about Germans in this Michigan publication. So oftentimes when one article leads you to a publication, look around and see what other kind of material you can get. Look at nearly every single article there is about Germans in Michigan. So look for all that kind of information. There's the Detroit area Germans article, pretty robust, pretty specific. Again, going back to the periodical source index, the index to journals and periodicals on Find My Past. We get a lot of entries, and we look for those ones that I have squared off where you actually can see the actual article online if you subscribe, if your library subscribes. And this is kind of a nice persons naturalized in New Jersey from the early 18th century to the late 18th century. And that's pretty decent for that time period. And you're not going to find a passenger list for this time period coming into New Jersey or New York and going to New Jersey. So we have to use this as a list of individuals. You probably have seen at the top of my slides throughout this segment a lot of special publications. Special publications. What's a special publication? I declare a special publication anything that helps bridge new country to old country, country where our ancestors immigrated back to the country of origin from which they left. Atlantic Bridge, Germany, multi-volume set, a lot of maps showing where people came from predominantly during a particular time period and where they may have settled after they came to the United States. A very popular book here, Ships of Our Ancestors. I believe such publications are fairly numerous for other corners of the world, but people are fascinated with, well, what did the ship look like that my ancestor came on? And I understand that. I would like to put my ancestor in that same context. Okay, how did people in the early 19th century come from Hamburg or come from Le Havre or come from Liverpool to get to North America, Canada, or the United States? That would be kind of cool to know. So this is just one of many books that show steamships, sailing ships, depending upon the time period. So we're going to quickly move into what I call leaving documents. We first talked about settling down documents. We talked about arriving documents. These are documents that are created in the country of origin. They don't all exist for every country or every time period. And they don't all exist for our ancestors because they may have been lost over time. These apply to geographic areas during particular time periods. So again, I've mentioned it once or twice tonight. We need to be really good students of history and find out, okay, in 1817, in a particular German city-state, what was required for that person to leave? Did they have to have a letter of manumission, basically saying they were freed from all their responsibility, they were not tied to the land in any feudal system, and they could emigrate, they could leave? If they owned property, they had to sell the property. Sometimes in some places, some of our ancestors, that's a lot of sums, needed a permit to immigrate. So you had to kind of go through a checklist. Did you fulfill your military obligations? Are you able to leave? Work permits, if you had to travel from, like, say, Germany to Liverpool, and maybe you had to work for a while to get enough money for your passage from Liverpool to the New World. Travel documents, anything that our ancestors may have brought with them. And then the big one we all hope for are the immigration lists. They're the passenger lists of passengers leaving the old country, coming to the new country. It is a process. Survey the area's history and available documents, because that's where you want the process to begin. I find so many good journal articles on specific ethnic groups during specific time periods, what was required. I heartily offer those articles to you. Look for those articles about your particular ethnic group leaving the old world and coming to whatever part of the new world, whether it's the new world, I endearingly say, in the land down under, in New Zealand, in Australia, or whether it's the new world in Canada and the United States, or whether it's the new world in South America, Brazil, Argentina. Look for articles that talk about what's required to leave and what's required to come. Just a couple quick bullet points, and I'm going to have to speed up. Know what constitutions and laws governed leaving a country, leaving an area, leaving a city-state. So the German Confederation Constitution of 1815, they guaranteed all citizens of German states the freedom of movement, including to leave. Of course, freedom and movement, as the second bullet point says, came with a lot of restrictions and ties. So Hamburg, between 1845 and 48, they set up an administrative system to produce passport ledgers and passenger lists to document people leaving. If your ancestor left during that time period, how can you find these lists? Give you a clue. Family Search. It's a great place. More about Hamburg, just to pick on a city and to reference an article that I found very, very helpful. Passports cover this time period. Family Search has digitized and presented a lot of these. Those applying were required to be residents or having papers certified they were not eligible for military service or had completed that service. So knowing the history. Immigrants planning to work had to register with the police. Where are those police logs? Some immigrants may have become citizens to enhance their ability to get work so they could pay for their passage. Here's a handwritten English emigrant list, people leaving England for a fairly late time period in the 18th century. Here's the well-known and well-talked-about Hamburg passenger list. Passengers leaving Hamburg. A lot of great information on there. And as I've joked a couple of times throughout my wonderful time with this expo, yes, documents from the countries of origin are usually in the language of that country. So we can expect it to be in German. So all kinds of newspaper advertisements if we're looking to find out what shipping companies our ancestors may have been on, what kind of ships. I like this particular advertisement. It tells you from Liverpool to Philadelphia every Wednesday, from Philadelphia for Liverpool every Thursday, that they're bringing people who are probably going to be settling in these areas. So a nice piece of contexting information that we can get. So I think I've ended sort of on time so that we have just a few minutes for questions. But the passenger immigration research, it really is a process. Settling down, arriving, and leaving. And I am concerned if we spend too much time focusing on the arriving. Focus primarily and initially on the settling down, and then maybe even skip over for a moment the arriving and go to leaving if you can find that country or city, state, or area of origin and see what was required.